The hook, the splash, echoed through the suburban silence like a gunshot. Sarah Martinez watched from her kitchen window as her 8-year-old daughter, Maya, cannonballed into their backyard pool, her laughter piercing the morning air. What Sarah didn't see was Karen Whitfield's face pressed against her own window next door, twisted with a rage that would soon shatter to families forever. By sunset, Karen's single phone call would transform Sarah's innocent pool party into a neighborhood war that would expose buried secrets, destroy reputations, and prove that sometimes the quietest suburbs hide the loudest monsters. But Karen made one fatal mistake. She underestimated a mother's fury when her child's joy becomes a weapon. The morning sun cast rippling diamonds across the surface of the Ramirez family pool as 8-year-old Maya burst through the back door, her arms laden with pool noodles and inflatable unicorns. Her infectious giggle carried across the manicured lawns of Willowbrook Estates, where every house looked like it had been carved from the same suburban dream. "Mom, can Emma and Tyler come over, please?" Maya's dark eyes sparkled with the kind of pure excitement that made Sarah's chest tighten with love. Sarah Martinez looked up from her laptop, where she'd been reviewing medical charts, the never-ending cascade of patient files that followed her home from the pediatric clinic. Of course, Mia, but remember the rules. No running on the deck, no diving in the shallow end, and sunscreen every hour. They finished in unison, Maya rolling her eyes with theatrical exasperation. Within 30 minutes, the backyard had transformed into a symphony of childhood joy. Emma Chen's strawberry blonde hair flew behind her as she raced Tyler Williams to the deep end, their competitive shrieks echoing off the water. Maya orchestrated elaborate games of Marco Polo while Sarah lounged in a deck chair, stealing glances at her work between moments of pure contentment. This was why she'd worked 18-hour shifts during residency, why she'd saved every penny for the down payment on this house, why she'd chosen Willowbrook Estates despite the mortgage payments that sometimes kept her awake at night. Maya deserved this safety. Friends, the kind of carefree summer that would live in her memory forever. Mrs. Martinez, Emma paddled over to the pool's edge, her face flushed with exertion. "Can we have a pool party next weekend? Like with decorations and everything?" Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her ex-husband, Miguel. "Maya's recital is Sunday at 3. Don't be late this time." She suppressed the familiar spike of irritation. Late? She'd missed exactly one event in 2 years, and that was because of a medical emergency. "We'll see, sweetheart," Sarah called back, then muttered under her breath, "If I can survive your parents' scheduling demands." The afternoon stretched lazily ahead, punctuated by the rhythmic splash of swimming and the occasional shriek of delight. Sarah had just dozed off when the sharp rap of knuckles against her front door jolted her awake. She glanced at her watch, 2:47 p.m. The kids were still playing, their voices a comfortable background hum. Who could be visiting in the middle of a Thursday afternoon? Through the peephole, Sarah saw a woman she recognized but had never actually met her next-door neighbor. Tall, angular, with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun that seemed to stretch her features into a permanent expression of disapproval. Karen Whitfield had lived next door for 3 years. Yet their only interactions had been stilted waves across the property line. Sarah opened the door with a polite smile. "Hi there, I'm Sarah, from next door. We haven't officially met." Pale blue eyes swept past Sarah toward the backyard, where another round of laughter erupted. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "We need to talk." The chill in Karen's voice made Sarah's smile falter. "Of course. Would you like to come in? This will be brief." Karen remained planted on the doorstep, her posture rigid as a telephone pole. "Your pool situation has become unacceptable." "I'm sorry," Sarah blinked, genuinely confused. "Is there a problem with the noise, the constant screaming, the disruption?" Each word fell like a hammer blow. "Some of us are trying to work from home. Some of us value peace and quiet in our neighborhoods." Heat crept up Sarah's neck. "They're just kids playing. It's summer vacation. It's excessive." Karen's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Every day, from morning until evening. The splashing, the yelling, the complete disregard for anyone else's quality of life. From the backyard, Maya's voice rang out, "Mom, Tyler found a frog." Karen flinched as if the sound had physically struck her. See? It's like living next to a public pool. They're 8 years old, Sarah said, struggling to keep her voice level. They're having fun. It's what kids do. Not at this volume, not with this frequency. Karen pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be a lengthy list. Yesterday, continuous noise from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Tuesday, screaming that could be heard 3 houses away. Monday, some kind of pool party that lasted until after 7 o'clock. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. You've been, documenting their playtime. Someone has to maintain standards in this neighborhood. Karen's smile was as cold as winter. Metal. I've already contacted the HOA about the noise violations. Noise violations. Sarah's voice pitched higher. 4 kids swimming in their own backyard. According to the Willowbrook Estates community guidelines, excessive noise that disturbs the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties is strictly prohibited. Karen recited the words like a legal incantation. Section 4.2, subsection C. The absurdity of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. You're threatening to report children for being too happy in their own pool. I'm informing you that your daughter's activities are disrupting the entire neighborhood. Karen's eyes narrowed. Perhaps if you were home more often, instead of dumping her on babysitters, you could teach her some consideration for others. The words hit Sarah like a slap. Excuse me, I see the parade of different cars dropping her off, the various adults picking her up. It's obvious you're too busy with your career to actually parent. Sarah's vision blurred at the edges. 3 years of exhaustion, of juggling 18-hour shifts with school pickups and grocery runs and homework help, of lying awake wondering if she was failing Maya, if choosing single motherhood had been selfish. All of it crystallized into white-hot fury. You don't know anything about my family. I know enough. Karen stepped closer, and Sarah caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with something bitter. I know your pool has turned this neighborhood into a circus. I know your daughter has. No concept of indoor voice, let alone outdoor consideration. And I know that if this doesn't stop immediately, I'll be forced to take further action. Further action? Karen's smile was all teeth and no warmth. The city has very specific ordinances. About residential noise levels, the HOA has enforcement mechanisms you might find inconvenient. There are ways to make excessive neighbors understand the value of community cooperation. From the backyard came another burst of laughter, Maya's voice rising above the others. As she announced the start of a new game, to Sarah, it sounded like pure joy. To Karen, apparently, it sounded like warfare. Are you threatening me? Sarah's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. I'm educating you about community standards. Your pool parties end now, or I'll ensure they end permanently. Karen turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Sarah, you might want to check your property lines. That pool of yours sits awfully close to the boundary. It would be a shame if there were complications, with your permits. She walked away without another word, her heels clicking against the sidewalk like a countdown timer. Sarah stood in her doorway, trembling with rage and something deeper, a primal protective instinct that made her want to scream. From the backyard, Maya's voice carried on the summer breeze. Mom, come swimming with us. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, her heart hammering. In 30 seconds, Karen Whitfield had managed to poison what should have been a perfect afternoon. But more than that, she'd made it clear that Maya's happiness was somehow an offense worthy of legal action. Sarah walked through her house toward the backyard, watching her daughter through the sliding glass door. Maya was teaching Emma how to do a handstand underwater, her face bright with concentration and joy. This was childhood. This was exactly what Sarah had worked so hard to give her. She slid open the door and stepped onto the deck. Hey guys, who's ready for snacks? The 3 children cheered and splashed toward the shallow end. Sarah forced a smile and headed for the kitchen, but her mind was already racing. Karen Whitfield had just declared war on her daughter's happiness. What Karen didn't realize was that she'd picked a fight with someone who had spent years fighting much bigger battles. Sarah had survived medical school, residency, and single motherhood. She'd stood up to attending physicians, insurance companies, and her ex-husband's family. A bitter neighbor with a grudge against children's laughter. That was nothing compared to what Sarah was willing to do to protect Maya's joy, as she pulled juice boxes from the refrigerator. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Pool noise ordinance complaint filed. Case number WB202-41847. Hearing scheduled for Monday. 9 a.m., City Hall, room 203. Failure to appear will result in automatic fine of $500. Have a blessed day. K. Whitfield. Sarah stared at the M. Part 2. The Haraneg the fluorescent lights in City Halls. Room 203 buzzed like angry wasps, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made Sarah's skin look jaundiced. She sat in the front row of folding chairs, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The manila folder beside her contained 3 days' worth of research: noises ordinance precedents, HOA bylaws, property surveys, and a list of character references that read like a who's who of most respected residents. Karen Whitfield sat across the aisle, her posture as rigid as a statue. She wore a navy blazer that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly car payment, and her gray hair was pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her pale skin taut across her skull. Between them sat a cheap laminate table where City Administrator Harold Potts shuffled through a stack of papers with the enthusiasm of someone counting funeral programs. Case WB 202-41847, Potts announced in a voice that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Noise complaint filed by Karen Whitfield against Sarah Martinez regarding excessive residential noise levels. Sarah's throat felt like sandpaper. 3 days of sleepless nights had left her feeling hollowed out, but she'd used every minute researching ways to protect Maya's right to play in their own backyard. What she'd discovered had made her stomach turn. Mrs. Whitfield, please present your complaint. Karen stood with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her own righteousness. Thank you, Mr. Potts. For the past several weeks, my neighbor has allowed her property to become a public nuisance. The noise levels from her pool area consistently exceed reasonable residential standards. She pulled out a thick binder and placed it on the table with a satisfying thud. I have documented every instance of excessive noise, complete with timestamps and decibel readings taken from my own property. Sarah's jaw dropped. Decibel readings? Karen had been measuring her daughter's laughter with scientific instruments. As you can see, Karen continued, flipping through pages of meticulously organized charts. The noise levels regularly exceed 65 decibels during peak hours. According to City Ordinance 247B, residential areas should maintain noise levels below 55 decibels during daytime hours. Potts squinted at the charts. And these readings were taken from your property, my bedroom window, to be precise. The constant screaming and splashing makes it impossible to work from home. I run a consulting business, and I've had to reschedule multiple client calls due to the disruption. Sarah felt heat creep up her neck, screaming. Maya and her friends weren't screaming, they were laughing, playing, being kids. The way Karen described it, you'd think Sarah was running a death metal concert in her backyard. Mrs. Martinez, Potts turned to Sarah with the weary expression of a man who'd mediated to many neighbor disputes. Your response? Sarah stood, her legs unsteady. Mr. Potts, my daughter and her friends are simply playing in our pool during normal daytime hours. They're 8 years old. The sounds Mrs. Whitfield is describing as excessive noise are just children having fun. Fun that disrupts the entire neighborhood, Karen interjected. I've spoken with several other residents who share my concerns but were too polite to file complaints. That's not true. Sarah's voice gained strength. I've lived in this neighborhood. For 3 years, I've never received a single complaint from anyone else. Because they're afraid of confrontation, Karen shot back. But I'm not. Sarah opened her folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. Actually, I have statements from 12 of our neighbors expressing support for Maya's right to play in our backyard. The Chuns, the Williamses, the Johnsons, the same neighbors whose children benefit from using your pool. Karen interrupted. Of course they'd support you. The Patels who don't have children, Sarah continued, the Garcias whose kids are grown, and Mrs. Henderson who's lived in this neighborhood for 20 years and says she's never seen children play more respectfully. Potts glanced between the two women, clearly wishing he'd called in sick. Mrs. Whitfield, you mentioned decibel readings. Do you have the actual equipment certification for your measurements? Karen's confidence flickered for just a moment. I used a smartphone app. A smartphone app. Potts frowned. Those aren't admissible for legal noise complaints. We'd need readings from certified equipment, taken by a licensed technician. The point isn't the exact numbers, Karen said, her voice tightening. The point is that excessive noise is disrupting peaceful enjoyment of private property. Sarah seized the opening. Mr. Potts, I've researched the city's noise ordinances extensively. Normal residential activities, including children playing in backyard pools, are specifically protected during daytime hours. The ordinance, Mrs. Whitfield, referenced applies to mechanical noise sources, not human activity. Is that correct? Potts asked, though he was already reaching for a thick binder of city codes. Page 247, subsection 4, Sarah said. Residential noise ordinances specifically exempt normal domestic activities, including, but not limited to, children's play during hours of 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Karen's face had gone pale. That can't be right. It is right, Sarah said, feeling a surge of vindication. I also discovered something interesting in my research. She pulled out another document. According to the city's public records, Mrs. Whitfield has filed 7 noise complaints in the past 2 years against 6 different neighbors. Potts looked up sharply. 17. The college students who rented the Patel's house last summer, the Williamses' teenage son practicing basketball, the Garcias' weekend barbecues, and now my daughter's pool time. Karen's jaw tightened. I believe in maintaining community standards. You believe in harassment? Sarah said, her voice rising. You've systematically targeted every family in our neighborhood for the crime of living their lives. That's enough, Potts said, but his tone suggested he was more interested than annoyed. Mrs. Whitfield, is this accurate? I've filed legitimate complaints about legitimate disturbances, Karen said stiffly. If people would just show some consideration. Sarah's control finally snapped. You want consideration? Let me tell you about consideration. My daughter plays in our pool for maybe 3 hours a day during reasonable hours with 2 friends. They're not throwing wild parties. They're not being destructive. They're 8-year-old children swimming in their own backyard. She stood up, trembling with anger. I work 50-hour weeks as a pediatric nurse practitioner. I come home exhausted, and the sound of Maya laughing in that pool is the best part of my day. It's the sound of childhood, of joy, of everything I work so hard to give her. Your work schedule doesn't entitle you to disturb the neighborhood, Karen said coldly. Disturb the neighborhood. Sarah's voice cracked. Maya has lived in this house for 3 years. She's never broken anything, never been disrespectful, never caused any actual problems. But you want to take away her right to be a kid in her own backyard because the sound of children laughing offends you. I want reasonable, quiet hours. You want control. Sarah's voice was deadly quiet now. You want to control what your neighbors do, how they live, when they're allowed to enjoy their own property. You've turned being a neighbor into a contact sport. Potts cleared his throat. Ladies, I think I've heard enough. Mrs. Whitfield, while I appreciate your concerns about noise levels, children playing in their own backyard during reasonable hours is not a violation of city ordinances. Unless you can provide certified decibel readings that prove actual ordinance violations, this complaint is dismissed. Karen's face flushed crimson. This is exactly the kind of weak enforcement that's destroying neighborhood standards. However, Potts continued, I am concerned about the pattern of complaints, Mrs. Whitfield. Filing frivolous noise complaints is itself a violation of city ordinances. If you continue to file unsubstantiated complaints, you could face fines of up to $1,000 per incident. The room fell silent, except for the angry buzzing of the fluorescent lights. Karen gathered her papers with sharp, jerky movements, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. This isn't over, she said, her voice low and dangerous. There are other ways to handle problem neighbors. Sarah felt ice water run down her spine. What does that mean? It means that pools require permits. Property lines need to be surveyed. HOA bylaws have very specific requirements about recreational facilities. Karen's smile was sharp as broken glass. It means that maybe your little paradise isn't as secure as you think. She swept out of the room, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and something darker, the smell of someone who'd been publicly humiliated and was planning revenge. Potts looked at Sarah with something approaching sympathy. Ma'am, I'd recommend documenting any future interactions with Mrs. Whitfield. People who file this many complaints, sometimes they escalate. Sarah nodded, but her mind was already racing. Karen's parting threats about permits and property lines weren't idle intimidation, and someone with Karen's resources and connections could make Sarah's life very difficult if she wanted to. As Sarah walked to her car, her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Mom, when are you coming home?" Emma's mom brought popsicles and were having a tea party by the pool. Sarah smiled, despite everything. Maya had no idea that her innocent pool time had just become the scent. Part 3. The investagio was elbow deep. In breakfast dishes, when the knock came 3 sharp raps that somehow managed to sound official, through the kitchen window, she could see Maya and Emma already in the pool, their squeals of delight mixing with the morning birdsong. It was barely 9 a.m. on a Saturday, and her daughter was already living her best life. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Sarah dried her hands and walked to the front door, her stomach clenching when she saw the clipboard and official city vehicle parked in her driveway. A stocky man in a white polo shirt stood on her doorstep, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Jim Rodriguez from the city's Code Enforcement Division. I need to conduct an inspection of your pool area." Sarah's mouth went dry. "An inspection? For what?" Rodriguez consulted his clipboard. "We've received complaints about potential permit violations and property line encroachments. I need to verify that your pool installation complies with all city codes and zoning requirements." From the backyard came a splash and Maya's delighted shriek. "Emma, you got me!" Rodriguez's eyes flicked toward the sound, and Sarah saw something like sympathy cross his features. "Look, Mrs. Martinez, I know this is probably about the noise complaint from earlier this week, but when we get reports about unpermitted structures, we have to investigate unpermitted structures." Sarah's voice pitched higher. "My pool was installed 3 years ago. We pulled all the proper permits. I'm sure you did. This is probably just someone trying to cause trouble. But I still need to verify the permits and check the property lines." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. The complaint specifically mentioned concerns about setback violations and improper electrical installation. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Those were serious allegations, the kind that could result in massive fines or even orders to remove the pool entirely who filed the complaint. "I can't disclose that information, but ... Rodriguez glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Between you and me, we've been getting a lot of complaints from your neighborhood lately. Same person, multiple properties. Most of them turn out to be frivolous. Karen, of course, it was Karen. Can I see the paperwork?" Sarah asked Rodriguez. Handed her a carbon copy of the complaint form. Sarah scanned it quickly, her heart sinking with each line. The complaint alleged that her pool violated setback requirements, lacked proper electrical permits, and had been installed without required safety inspections. Each allegation was detailed, specific, and completely fabricated. "These are all lies," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "My pool is completely legal. I have all the permits." "Then this should be quick and easy," Rodriguez said gently. "Can you show me your permit documents?" Sarah led him inside, her mind racing. The permits were in her filing cabinet somewhere, but she hadn't looked at them in 3 years. What if she couldn't find them? What if there was some technicality she'd missed? From the backyard, Maya's voice carried through the sliding glass door. "Mom, come swimming with us!" "In a minute," Sarah called back, frantically rifling through folders, building permits, home inspection reports, mortgage documents where. "Take your time," Rodriguez said. "I'll start with the external inspection." Sarah's hands trembled as she searched. Finally, in a folder marked Pool Installation, she found what she was looking for: a thick stack of permits, inspections, reports, and approval letters from the city. Every document stamped, signed, and properly filed. She grabbed the folder and rushed outside, where Rodriguez was measuring distances from the pool to the property line with a laser measuring device. "Here," Sarah said, thrusting the folder at him. "All the permits, all the inspections. Everything's legal." Rodriguez flipped through the documents, comparing them to measurements on his tablet. Pool permit approved September 15, 2021. Electrical inspection passed. October 2nd, final safety inspection passed October 20th. He looked up at Sarah. Everything looks in order. Relief flooded through Sarah's body like warm water. "So we're good. Well, I still need to verify the property lines. The complaint specifically mentioned encroachment issues. Rodriguez pulled out a larger measuring device. Do you have a recent survey? Sarah's relief evaporated. A survey? I know. Why would I need a survey? The pool company handled all the measurements. For something this close to the property line, we typically recommend a professional survey. Rodriguez began taking measurements from various corners of the property. Your pool is definitely close to the boundary. From next door, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement in Karen's window, a shadow behind lace curtains, watching the proceedings with obvious satisfaction. How close is too close? Sarah asked. City code requires a 5-foot setback from property lines for permanent structures. Rodriguez frowned at his measurements. By my calculations, your pool deck extends to within 4 feet, 8 inches of the property line. Sarah's knees went weak. 4 inches? You're saying my pool violates city code by 4 inches? If these measurements are accurate, yes, but I'd recommend getting a professional survey to be sure. Sometimes property lines aren't where we think they are, and if it is a violation, Rodriguez's expression was sympathetic but firm. You'd need to either modify the pool to comply with setback requirements or apply for a variance through the zoning board. What does modifying mean? Probably removing part of the deck? Maybe reducing the pool size? Rodriguez began packing up his equipment. Look, Mrs. Martinez, get a professional survey done first. If there's no violation, this all goes away. If there is, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. After Rodriguez left, Sarah stood in her backyard staring at the pool that had become the center of her universe. Maya and Emma were playing an elaborate game involving pool noodles and plastic teacups, their laughter echoing off the water. They had no idea that their playground might be in jeopardy. Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her number, Miguel. Not now, Sarah. What's this about Maya's pool being illegal? Sarah's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? I just got a call from some neighbor of yours, Karen something. She said there's a city investigation into your pool, that it might have to be torn down. She said she was concerned about Maya's safety. She called you. Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. She said she got my number from Maya, that Maya mentioned her daddy when they were talking over the fence. Miguel's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Sarah, is Maya's pool safe or not? Of course it's safe. Miguel, this woman is harassing us. She filed a frivolous complaint because she doesn't like the sound of children playing. So, the pool is legal. Sarah hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Miguel to catch it. Sarah, is the pool legal or not? There might be a minor setback issue. Maybe we're getting it surveyed, to be sure. Jesus Christ, Sarah, you mean to tell me our daughter has been swimming in a pool that violates city codes? It's not a safety issue. It's a property line technicality that might not even be real. Technicality? Miguel's voice rose. Sarah, if the city says the pool is illegal, what happens to Maya when she gets hurt? What happens to our insurance? What happens when Child Services decides you're providing an unsafe environment? Child Services? The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She hadn't thought about that possibility, but Miguel was right. An illegal pool could become ammunition in a custody battle. Miguel, please don't make this bigger than it is. I'm not making anything bigger. But if that pool is a liability, Maya doesn't swim in it until it's fixed. Period. You can't do that. You can't dictate what happens in my backyard. Watch me. Miguel's voice was ice cold now. I'm calling my lawyer. If your pool violates city codes, I'm filing for emergency custody modification until it's fixed. The line went dead. Sarah stood frozen, her phone still pressed to her ear. From the pool, Maya called out, Mom, look at my handstand. Sarah turned. To see her daughter's legs waggling above the water's surface, Emma clapping with delight. It was the picture of innocent summer, fun, exactly what Sarah had worked so hard to provide, and now it was all crashing down because of 4 inches. And one bitter woman's vendetta. Sarah walked inside and opened her laptop, her fingers shaking as she searched for property surveyors. The quotes ranged from $800 to $1,500 money. She didn't really have, but would find somehow. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. So sorry to hear about your pool troubles. If you need recommendations for contractors who specialize. In pool removal, I'd be happy to help. Neighbor looking out for neighbor. Sarah stared at the message, rage building in her chest like a storm system. Karen hadn't just filed a complaint, she'd researched Sarah's personal life, contacted her ex-husband, and was now offering to help destroy the pool. She'd targeted for elimination. This wasn't about noise complaints or property lines or community standards. This was about power. This was about a woman who couldn't stand to see a single mother and her daughter living their lives with joy and independence. Sarah looked out at Maya, who was now teaching Emma synchronized swimming moves with the seriousness of an Olympic coach. Her daughter's happiness had become someone else's target. And that was unforgivable. If Karen Whitfield wanted to escalate this into a neighborhood war, Sarah was ready to fight. But she was also smart enough. Part 4. The COUNTRATCK. Survey results arrived on a Wednesday morning, like a death sentence wrapped in official letterhead. Sarah stared at the numbers until they blurred. Her pool deck extended exactly 3 inches and 7/8 of an inch into the required 5-foot setback. Less than 4 inches of concrete stood between Maya's happiness and complete disaster. Sarah's hands shook as she called the surveyor. "Are you absolutely certain about these measurements, ma'am?" "I've been doing this for 22 years, came the gravelly reply. "Your pool deck violates the setback by 3.875 inches. "I'm sorry, but there's no margin of error here." The cost estimates came next. Modifying the pool to comply would require removing and rebuilding a third of the deck at $18,000 minimum. Applying for a variance through the zoning board would cost $2,500 in fees alone, with no guarantee of approval. And Miguel's lawyer had already filed paperwork requesting emergency review of custody arrangements, citing unsafe and illegal conditions at the primary residence. Sarah sat in her kitchen, surrounded by paperwork that felt like shrapnel from an explosion she hadn't seen coming. Through the window, she could see Maya floating on her back in the pool, her dark hair spread like seaweed around her peaceful face. Her daughter had no idea that her sanctuary was about to be ripped away. Sarah's laptop was open to a folder. She'd labeled research 3 days' worth of deep diving into Karen Whitfield's life. What she'd found had made her stomach turn, her resolve harden into something sharp and dangerous. Karen wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a professional destroyer of other people's peace. The first clue had been Karen's business registration. Whitfield Consulting Standards Enforcement. Karen literally made money helping HOAs and municipalities crack down on property violations. She was a hired gun for suburban misery. And Sarah's neighborhood had become her testing ground. But that was just the beginning. Property records showed that Karen had purchased her house at a steep discount after the previous owners were forced to sell, following a series of code violations and HOA fines. The same pattern repeated at her last 3 addresses. Karen would move in, systematically file complaints against her neighbors until they either moved or spent thousands bringing their properties into compliance with obscure regulations. Then, buy their houses at below-market prices. Sarah had found online reviews from Karen's previous neighborhoods that read like horror stories. Families driven to bankruptcy by endless legal challenges. Elderly residents forced from homes they'd lived in for decades. Children forbidden from playing in their own yards. Karen Whitfield wasn't just a neighbor from hell. She was a predator who fed on other people's happiness and profited from their misery. And now she'd made the mistake of targeting Maya. Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her lawyer's office. "Sarah, we need to talk," Lisa Chen said without preamble. "Miguel's filing is more serious than I initially thought. He's not just requesting custody modification. He's alleging that you've created an unsafe environment through willful violation of building codes. It's 4 inches, Lisa, 4 inches of concrete that technically crosses a property line. It doesn't matter how small the violation is. What matters is that you knew about the complaint and continued allowing Maya to use the pool." Miguel's lawyer is painting this as reckless endangerment. Sarah closed her eyes. "What are my options?" "Fix the pool immediately and document everything. File for a variance and pray it gets approved. Or," Lisa paused, "or we could explore whether this complaint was filed in bad faith." "What do you mean?" "If we can prove that the complaint was harassment rather than a legitimate safety concern, we might be able to get it dismissed and go after whoever filed it for malicious prosecution." Sarah's pulse quickened. What would that require? evidence that the complainant has a pattern of frivolous filings, financial motivation for targeting your property, or personal animus that has nothing to do with legitimate code enforcement. Sarah looked at her laptop screen, filled with tabs, documenting Karen's systematic destruction of her previous neighborhoods. Lisa, what if I told you I have evidence that our neighbor is essentially a professional property harasser who's done this to dozens of families? The silence stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Sarah, Lisa finally said, how solid is this evidence? Property records, court filings, online reviews, business registrations. She's been doing this for years. Send me everything, all of it. If what you're saying is true, we might be able to turn this whole thing around. After hanging up, Sarah stared out at Maya, who was now practicing synchronized swimming moves with the single-minded focus that brought to their passions. Her daughter deserved better than to become collateral damage. In Karen's war against Joy, Sarah opened a new document and began typing to Willowbrook Estates HOA Board from Sarah Martinez, 247 Maple Drive, Re. Pattern of harassment by Karen Whitfield. Dear board members, I am writing to formally document a pattern of harassment and potential fraud being perpetrated by Karen Whitfield against multiple residents of our community. Sarah spent the next 2 hours crafting a meticulously documented complaint that laid out Karen's history, her business model, and the systematic way she'd been targeting Willowbrook families. She included property records, screenshots of Karen's business website advertising, neighborhood compliance enforcement, and testimonials from residents of Karen's previous neighborhoods. But the smoking gun was something Sarah had found buried. In the city's online records, Karen had inquired about purchasing Sarah's property 6 months ago, offering 20% below market value. The inquiry was dated 3 weeks before Maya's first pool party. Karen hadn't been complaining about noise. She'd been orchestrating Sarah's financial destruction so she could buy the house cheap. Sarah hit send on the HOA complaint, then opened her email to forward everything to Lisa. But before she could click send, her doorbell rang through the peephole. Sarah saw 2 figures in dark suits, a man and woman with a kind of serious expressions that meant official business. Mrs. Martinez, we're from Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you about a report concerning unsafe conditions. Sarah's world tilted sideways. She opened the door with trembling hands. Ma'am, we've received a report that your daughter is being allowed to use recreational facilities that violate city safety codes, the woman said, consulting a tablet. We need to conduct a home visit to assess the situation. From the backyard came Maya's voice. Mom, watch this dive. Your daughter is currently using the pool in question, the male agent asked. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Ma'am, we're going to need you to remove her from the water until we can complete our assessment. She's perfectly safe. The pool passed all its safety inspections. This is about a property line technicality, ma'am. When we receive reports about code violations involving children's safety, we have to take immediate action. The woman's voice was firm but not unkind. Please call your daughter inside. Sarah walked to the sliding door on unsteady legs. Maya was perched on the pool's edge, her legs dangling in the water, completely absorbed in arranging pool toys for her next game. Mia, come inside for a minute. But Mom, I'm not done swimming. Just for a few minutes, okay? We have some visitors. Maya's face fell, but she climbed out of the pool and wrapped herself in a towel. As she walked past the CPS agents, dripping pool water on the hardwood floor, Sarah saw them exchange glances. Mrs. Martinez, can you show us the documentation for your pool installation? Sarah retrieved the permit folder with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold the papers. The agents examined everything carefully, comparing permit numbers to information on their tablets. According to our records, there's an active code violation on this property, the male agent said. Until that violation is resolved, we're recommending that the recreational facility not be used by minors. You're saying Maya can't swim in her own pool? We're saying that until the city confirms the pool meets current safety codes, it presents a potential liability issue. Maya appeared in the doorway, still wrapped in her towel, her dark eyes wide with confusion. Mom, why can't I swim? Sarah knelt down and pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of chlorine and sunscreen that had become synonymous with summer happiness. There's just some paperwork stuff we need to fix, baby. It's temporary. But even as she said it, Sarah knew it might not be temporary at all. Karen's strategy was becoming clear death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts, code enforcement, CP, custody challenges, HOA violations, each agency feeding information to the others, creating a web of officialdom that could trap a single mother indefinitely. After the CPS agents left, promising to return for a follow-up visit once the code violations were resolved, Sarah sat on her couch with Maya curled against her side. "When can I swim again?" Maya asked in a small voice. "Soon, Mia, I promise." But Sarah's mind was already racing beyond promises to something darker. Karen Whitfield had just made this personal in a way that crossed every line Sarah held sacred. Threatening her property was one thing. Bringing CPS into Maya's life was warfare. And Sarah had just decided to fight back with everything she had. That evening, after Maya was asleep, Sarah opened her laptop and Part 5. The EXPOs you read the email hit inboxes at exactly 6 a.m. on Friday morning, timed for maximum impact when neighbors checked their phones over coffee. Sarah had spent all night crafting it, weaving together property records, court documents, and testimonials into a narrative that read like a suburban thriller. Subject: the truth about Karen Whitfield, a warning to our community dear neighbors. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I live at 247 Maple Drive with my 8-year-old daughter, Maya. 3 weeks ago, my neighbor Karen Whitfield filed complaints about my daughter playing in our backyard pool. Yesterday, Child Protective Services visited my home because of those complaints. Today, I want to share what I've discovered about the woman living next door to us. Karen Whitfield is not just a difficult neighbor. She is a professional predator who has systematically destroyed families in 3 previous communities. Sarah had included everything: Karen's business model, the property records showing her pattern of purchasing homes after driving down their values, testimonials from her previous victims, and the Smoking Gun Crin's inquiry about purchasing Sarah's house at below market value, dated weeks before the first pool complaint. By 7 a.m., Sarah's phone was ringing. "Sarah, what the hell have you done?" It was Janet Chen from the HOA board, her voice tight with panic. "I've told the truth about Karen Whitfield. You've just opened us up to a massive lawsuit. You can't make accusations like this without proof?" Sarah pulled up the email thread on her laptop. "Janet, I documented everything. Property records are public information. Court filings are public information. Karen's own business website advertises neighborhood compliance enforcement services. But the way you've presented it, the way I've presented it, is factual. Karen Whitfield has done this before, and she's doing it to us now. The only question is whether we're going to let her." Sarah's call waiting beeped. Another neighbor, then another. By 9 a.m., Sarah's email had been forwarded to half of Willowbrook Estates. By noon, it had reached the local Facebook groups. By evening, it was trending on Nextdoor with over 200 comments. The responses split into 3 camps: neighbors who'd had their own run-ins with Karen and were grateful someone had finally exposed her, people horrified by the allegations and demanding more proof, and Karen's defenders, who insisted this was all a vicious smear campaign by a woman facing legitimate code violations. But the most interesting responses came from outside Willowbrook Estates. Sarah's phone rang at 2 p.m. The caller ID showed a number from across town. "Mrs. Martinez, this is David Park. I saw your email about Karen Whitfield. She destroyed my family." Sarah's breath caught. "What do you mean?" She moved in next. "To us 2 years ago, started with noise complaints about my kids playing basketball. Then property line disputes. Then she reported us to the city for every tiny violation she could find: a loose board on our deck, a tree that allegedly blocked sight lines, a fence that was supposedly 6 inches too tall. What happened? We spent $30,000 trying to bring everything into compliance, had to take out a second mortgage. When we still couldn't afford all the modifications the city required, we were forced to sell." David's voice cracked. "She bought our house for 60% of what it was worth. We're renting now. My kids had to change schools." Sarah felt sick. "David, would you be willing to put this in writing?" "I'll do more than that. I've been waiting years for someone to expose her. I've got documentation of everything, every complaint she filed, every city citation, every dollar we spent because of her harassment." The calls kept coming. Jennifer Williams from Pine Ridge Subdivision, Marcus Johnson from Oakmont Hills, Tom and Linda Rodriguez from Cedar Creek. All of them with the same story. Karen Whitfield had moved into their neighborhoods, systematically targeted families for code violations and property disputes, profited when they were forced to sell. By Friday evening, Sarah had 12 documented cases spanning 5 years. The pattern was always the same. Karen would research neighborhood property values, target houses she wanted to acquire, then wage bureaucratic warfare until the families cracked under the financial and emotional pressure. Sarah was compiling the additional evidence when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a news van parked on the street and a woman with a microphone standing on her porch. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Rebecca Torres from Channel 7 News. We'd like to speak with you about your allegations against Karen Whitfield." Sarah opened the door cautiously. "How did you hear about this? Your email has been shared over 1,000 times on social media. We've received calls from multiple families claiming they were also victimized by Ms. Whitfield. This could be a significant story about predatory practices in residential communities." From next door, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement behind Karen's curtains. She imagined Karen's horror at seeing news vans in the neighborhood she'd been systematically conquering. "I'll speak with you," Sarah said, "but I want my story told accurately. This isn't about neighbor disputes. This is about someone who preys on families for profit." The interview took place in Sarah's backyard, with Maya's pool clearly visible in the background. Sarah had insisted on that location. She wanted viewers to see exactly what Karen had targeted for destruction. "Mrs. Martinez, tell us how this started," Rebecca Torres said as the camera rolled. "3 weeks ago, my neighbor complained about my 80-year-old daughter playing in our pool. She said the children were too loud, too happy. What I discovered is that she'd already researched buying my house at below market value. The noise complaints were just the opening move in a strategy to force us out. That's a serious allegation. What evidence do you have?" Sarah had prepared for this moment. She pulled out a folder containing property records, Karen's business registration, and testimonials from previous victims. Karen Whitfield runs a business called Neighborhood Standards Enforcement. She specializes in finding code violations and property disputes that can be used to pressure homeowners into selling. She's done this in at least 3 previous communities, targeting families with children and forcing them from their homes. "Have you spoken with Ms. Whitfield about these allegations?" Ms. Whitfield's response was to escalate her harassment. She filed false reports with code enforcement and child protective services. "Yesterday, CPS visited my home and told my daughter she couldn't swim in her own pool." The camera panned to Maya's pool, empty now, except for a few floating toys that looked forlorn in the afternoon light. "What do you want to happen now?" Sarah looked directly into the camera. "I want families to know what Karen Whitfield is. I want the city to investigate her pattern of frivolous complaints. And I want my daughter to be able to play in her own backyard without being targeted by someone who profits from destroying children's happiness." The segment aired at 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. By Saturday morning, it had been picked up by 3 other local stations and was trending on YouTube. Sarah's phone started ringing at dawn. "Sarah Martinez." The voice was crisp, professional. "This is Amanda Chen with the State Attorney General's office. We'd like to speak with you about Karen Whitfield." The Attorney General's office. "Based on the information that's come to light, we're opening an investigation into potential fraud and harassment charges. Consumer protection laws prohibit the kind of predatory behavior you've described. We'd like you to come in Monday morning with all your documentation." Sunday brought a parade of news vans and reporters. The story had gone viral. Suburban Predator exposed how one woman destroyed dozens of families. Karen's house was surrounded by journalists, but her curtains remained drawn and her phone apparently disconnected. Sarah watched from her kitchen window as the media circus unfolded. Maya was at her father's house for the weekend. Sarah had decided she didn't need to see this particular battle playing out. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You have no idea what you've started. This is far from over." Sarah stared at the message, recognizing the tone if not the number. Even facing potential criminal charges, Karen was still making threats. Sarah screenshot the message and forwarded it to both her lawyer and the detective who'd been assigned to investigate Karen's activities. Then she typed back a response. "You're right. This is far from over. But it's over for you." By Sunday evening, the story had reached national news. A CNN correspondent was standing in front of Karen's house, explaining how social media had exposed a suburban property predator who had allegedly driven dozens of families from their homes. Sarah sat in her living room, watching coverage of her own neighborhood on national television. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a single mother, trying to give her daughter a happy childhood. Now she was the face of a nationwide investigation into predatory neighborhood harassment. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her ex-husband's number. Sarah. Miguel's voice was different, apologetic, almost sheepish. "I saw the news. I'm withdrawing the custody motion. Miguel, I should have listened to you. I should have known you'd never put Maya in danger. This woman, ... what she did to you, to our daughter, ... it's unforgivable." Sarah felt tears she hadn't realized she was holding back start to fall. "She tried to destroy us, Miguel. She tried to take away everything I've worked for, but she didn't. Succeed. You fought back. You protected Maya." Miguel paused. Part 6. The CELIBRE twine 3 months later. Sarah stood on her back deck watching Maya execute a perfect cannonball into the sparkling pool, sending a cascade of water across the newly expanded deck space. The sound of her daughters delighted shriek, mixed with the laughter of 15 other children, their voices creating the kind of joyful chaos that had started this whole nightmare. But now it wasn't a nightmare, it was a celebration. The Willowbrook Pool Liberation Party, as Maya had dubbed it, was in full swing. Parents lounged in lawn chairs while their children played elaborate games of pool tag and synchronized swimming competitions. The smell of grilling burgers mixed with the scent of sunscreen and chlorine, creating the perfect suburban summer atmosphere. Sarah, Janet Chen, approached with a pitcher of lemonade and a huge smile. "I owe you an apology and a thank you." Sarah looked up from arranging paper plates on the picnic table. "For what? For doubting you? For thinking you were being dramatic about Karen?" Janet's expression grew serious. "My daughter Emma told me something yesterday. She said Karen used to watch the kids swimming from her upstairs window and write things down in a notebook. Emma thought she was just being friendly, but now we know she was documenting evidence for her harassment campaign," Sarah finished. The investigation into Karen Whitfield had uncovered far more than anyone expected. The state attorney general's office had traced her activities across 7 communities over 8 years. She'd driven 43 families from their homes, acquiring 12 properties at drastically reduced prices. The estimated financial damage to her victims exceeded $2.3 million. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators searched Karen's house after her arrest. They found detailed files on every family in Willowbrook Estate's property values, mortgage information, family schedules, even photographs of children playing in their yards. Karen hadn't just been targeting Sarah. She'd been systematically researching every family in the neighborhood to determine which ones would be most vulnerable to her predatory schemes. Mrs. Martinez. Tyler Williams came running up, dripping, wet and breathless with excitement. "Maya says you're going to tell us the story about how you defeated the pool monster." Sarah laughed. "The pool monster, that's what we call her." Emma Chen chimed in, joining Tyler at the picnic table. "The mean lady who tried to steal our pool parties." Maya emerged from the water, her dark hair slicked back and her face glowing with happiness. "Mom, you promised you'd tell them how you saved our pool." Sarah looked around at the assembled children, the same kids, whose laughter had been deemed excessive noise by Karen Whitfield. They were looking at her with the kind of hero worship usually reserved for superheroes and pop stars. "Well," Sarah said, settling into a lawn chair as the children gathered around, "it started when a very unhappy woman decided that kids having fun was against the law." As Sarah told the story, carefully edited for 8-year-old sensibilities, she caught glimpses of the adults listening in. David Park had driven over from across town with his family, the first time his children had been in a neighborhood pool since Karen destroyed their lives. Jennifer Williams from Pine Ridge had brought her twins, who were finally learning to swim again after 2 years of trauma-induced fear of pools. The class action lawsuit had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Karen Whitfield was facing criminal charges for fraud, harassment, and filing false reports. She'd been ordered to pay restitution to all her victims and banned from working in any capacity related to property management or code enforcement. Her real estate license had been revoked, and she was facing potential prison time. But more importantly, the case had sparked legislative changes. The Willowbrook Act now required municipalities to investigate patterns of frivolous complaints and imposed penalties for malicious use of code enforcement as harassment. Karen's predatory business model had been outlawed in 17 states. So, what happened to the pool monster? One of the younger children asked. Well, Sarah said, glancing toward Karen's former house, which now sported a cheerful yellow paint job and a swing set in the backyard, she had to move far, far away, and she can never bother families again. Good Maya declared with the fierce satisfaction of an 8-year-old who'd seen justice served. Nobody should be mean to kids just for being happy. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself in conversation with Rebecca Torres, the reporter who'd first covered the story. Rebecca was now working on a documentary about suburban predators and the families who fought back. You know what struck me most about this story? Rebecca said, watching Maya organize a pool noodle jousting tournament. It wasn't just about one neighbor being difficult. Karen Whitfield represented something much darker, the idea that some people can't stand to see others, especially children, being genuinely happy. Sarah nodded. Maya asked me once why Karen hated the sound of kids laughing. I didn't have a good answer then. I still don't, really. Maybe that's the point. Maybe some people are just broken in ways that make them want to break others. Rebecca paused, but the important thing is that you didn't let her win. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the pool deck, families started gathering, their towels and pool toys, but nobody seemed eager to leave. This wasn't just a pool party, it was a celebration of something bigger, a victory over the forces that tried to steal childhood joy. A community coming together to protect what mattered most. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. Karen pled guilty to all charges. 18 months prison, full restitution to victims, permanent restraining order. It's over. Sarah stared at the message, feeling a weight she'd carried for months finally lift from her shoulders. It was really over. Maya could swim in peace. Neighborhood could be happy again. Mom, Maya called from the pool, where she was floating on her back, surrounded by glowing pool lights. Look, the water looks like stars. Sarah looked up at the real stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, then down at her daughter, floating peacefully in the water that had become a battlefield and was now, once again, simply a place for children to play. Miguel appeared beside her, having arrived to pick Maya up for his weekend. She looks happy, he said quietly. She is happy. We all are. Sarah, I know I said this before, but I want to say it again. What you did standing up to that woman, protecting not just Maya but all these other families, that took real courage. Sarah watched as Maya performed an elaborate underwater tea party for her friends, her movements graceful and joyful in the illuminated water. I didn't feel courageous. I just felt like a mother protecting her child. That's what courage is, Miguel said, doing what's right even when you're terrified. As the last families departed, promising to do this again next weekend, Sarah found herself alone with Maya in the backyard that had become the center of their universe. The pool lights cast dancing reflections on Maya's face as she floated on, her back humming contentedly to herself. Mia, are you ready to come inside? Just 5 more minutes. Maya's voice had the drowsy quality of a perfect summer evening. I want to look at the water stars a little longer. Sarah settled back into her lawn chair, content to watch her daughter enjoy the simple pleasure of floating in her own pool on a warm summer night. The sound of gentle splashing mixed with the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional car passing on the street. This was what she'd fought for. Not just the right to own a pool or the freedom from harassment, but this moment her daughter at peace in her own backyard, surrounded by the kind of safety and joy that every child deserved. Sarah's phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from Janet Chen. Thank you for saving our neighborhood. Same time next weekend. Sarah typed back, wouldn't miss it. Bring extra pool noodles. As Maya finally climbed out of the pool and wrapped herself in a fluffy towel, she looked up at Sarah with the kind of trust and happiness that made every battle worthwhile. Mom, Do you think we'll have pool parties forever, Sarah? Pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of chlorine in summer that had become synonymous with victory. Forever and always, Mia. Nobody will ever take your pool parties away again. And as they walked into the house together, Sarah knew she was telling the truth. The war for Maya's laughter was over, and happiness had won. The sound of children playing would echo through Willowbrook Estates for generations to come. A reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for money or power, but for the simple right to be joyful in your own backyard. Karen Whitfield had tried to steal that joy and failed. Maya's laughter would ring out across the summer water for years to come, the sweetest sound of victory any mother could ask for. The pool was free, the neighborhood was safe, and Maya could finally be 8 years old without anyone trying to make it a crime. In the end, that was all that mattered.